We often think about human behavior in terms of, well, what's good for the group, right? Connection, cooperation.
The positive traits.
Yeah, exactly. But what about the other side? Traits like, say, a lack of empathy. It's easy to just label them bad.
It is, but could there be more to it? Maybe even something deep in our evolutionary past.
That's a really interesting angle. And that's where we're headed today, isn't it?
It is, yeah. We're digging into The Psychopath in the Shadows, Chapter 4, which really pushes us to think differently. It suggests that some traits we see as negative might have actually given individuals an edge, way back when.
An edge for survival.
Yes.
So not just bad traits, but maybe adaptive ones in certain situations.
Exactly. That's the core evolutionary puzzle. Psychology suggests traits that help you survive and reproduce, well, they tend to get passed on. And this chapter floats the idea that in early human societies, think hunter-gatherers, fierce competition, scarce resources focusing intensely on your own needs, even if it meant less empathy, could have been surprisingly beneficial.
So if life was really tough, constant threats, not much food, being less worried about others' feelings might have helped you just get what you needed.
That's the hypothesis, yeah. Someone less swayed by others' emotions could potentially analyze things more coldly, act purely in self-interest, maybe without that hesitation empathy might cause.
Right.
The chapter also mentions a talent for manipulation, staying cool under pressure, that kind of thing.
It feels a bit strange to frame it that way, though, because cooperation was so vital too, surely.
Oh, absolutely. Cooperation was fundamental, no question. But the idea is that within that cooperative framework, individuals who could, let's say, strategically prioritize themselves using these traits might have gained an advantage in specific high-stakes moments.
Okay.
Kevin Dutton talks about this in The Wisdom of Psychopaths. The chapter references him. He argues these traits aren't just pathologies, they could be adaptive qualities in some contexts.
Like facing down a predator. You wouldn't want fear holding you back.
Exactly. Emotional detachment, purely rational thinking that could be life-saving. Fear clouds judgment, slows you down. Someone less fearful might just act more decisively.
Right. Quick, logical action.
And the chapter also gets into how these traits could help someone gain status, resources, through manipulation, basically. It's a darker side of social life, but this perspective makes us look at it.
But hang on, if these traits were so advantageous, wouldn't we see more of them? Why aren't they everywhere?
That's a great question. And the chapter brings up this concept called frequency-dependent selection. It's fascinating.
Okay.
Basically, the advantage of a trait isn't fixed. It depends on how common it is. When traits like low empathy are rare, maybe those individuals can exploit the more cooperative majority.
Right, take advantage.
But if too many people had those traits, cooperation itself would likely break down. The whole system collapses. So there's a kind of natural check on it.
So the system kind of self-regulates. They offer an edge when rare, but become a problem if they're the norm. Keeps them in check.
Precisely. There's a suggestion maybe their risk-taking, even if selfish, could sometimes accidentally benefit the group by introducing new strategies. But, and this is crucial, the chapter stresses the downsides.
Which are significant, I imagine.
Huge. Lack of genuine empathy makes building those deep, trusting relationships incredibly hard. And those are essential for long-term support, social cohesion. You can't build a stable society if everyone's purely out for themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. It wouldn't hold together.
So the conclusion is these traits likely stuck around because they did offer advantages in certain very competitive contexts. Detached decisions, emotional neutrality, risk-taking. Dutton and Blair's research supports this adaptive view, but the difficulty in forming lasting bonds probably kept the prevalence low. An evolutionary balance.
Okay, that sets the stage. Then the chapter dives into specifics, right? Like high stress tolerance and less fear. It paints a picture of someone almost built for danger.
Exactly. Think about human history, constant dangers. Hunter-gatherer life, warfare, natural disasters. Even today, high-pressure situations. In those moments, staying calm, making quick, good decisions, that's critical. High-stress tolerance, often linked to these traits, gives you that edge.
It's the person who doesn't fall apart when everything hits the fan. They can still think.
Right. Less bothered by fear and anxiety means a more measured, rational response, not just reacting impulsively. Dutton's work, mentioned again, really highlights this in situations like combat staying calm saves lives. Fear messes with judgment.
But isn't being fearless risky? Bravery is one thing, recklessness is another.
That's the crucial balance, yeah. The chapter acknowledges that. A lack of fear might mean bolder actions in a hunt, maybe improving the group's survival if they're a leader or warrior.
Okay.
It could also drive exploration, innovation, trying new things, finding new resources, things that might benefit everyone, even if the initial motive was less group-focused.
Like the classic bold explorer type.
Kind of. And we see echoes today, right? Business, politics, military fields where quick decisions and risk are often valued. The chapter notes how less emotional empathy might even help in persuasion or manipulation in leadership. Fearlessness tackles big challenges.
But it also warns about the downsides. Ignoring ethics, breaking rules, that leads to trouble.
Absolutely. Fearlessness might fuel innovation in tech or startups, but it can also mean ignoring ethical lines, damaging reputations, losing trust within a company. It's useful historically and sometimes now, but needs to be managed. It's a recurring theme. Advantage, but with serious risks.
Okay, next up was high social adaptability. This one seems like a paradox. Low empathy, but great social skills.
It is a different kind of social skill, isn't it? Not based on connection, but on sharp observation and strategy. The chapter says they might lack empathy, but they're often brilliant at watching others, reading actions, emotions.
But not to connect, more to figure people out for their own gain.
Exactly. Understand motivations, vulnerabilities, how people behave. Then they use that insight to adjust their behavior. Charm when needed, seem compliant, switch tactics fast, whatever works.
Dutton's chameleon analogy, right? Blending in.
Changing their colors to fit the social environment, secure a better position, sometimes cooperative, sometimes cunning.
Masters of social camouflage.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And it often comes with strong self-expression, charisma, confidence. That helps in getting leadership roles, especially where it's competitive, business, politics again.
Right.
Plus, they're less swayed by their own emotions, the chapter notes. So in a crisis, they can stay calm, flexible, while others might be overwhelmed.
The level-headed one in the chaos, making logical moves.
That's the idea. James Blair talks about the crisis manager concept, staying composed, focused on goals when others are distressed. That could be an evolutionary plus in complex social settings.
It's interesting how it keeps coming back to potential advantages in early human societies. Manipulating for resources, status, all without empathy holding them back.
Yeah. And we see parallels today, don't we? Business, politics, navigating relationships strategically, making decisions without emotional baggage. Sometimes it fuels innovation, even if it's ruthless.
But again, the warning signs are there. Trust.
Always. Building lasting, trust-based relationships is tough without genuine empathy. Exploitation gets discovered eventually, leads to isolation, backlash.
So adaptable, yes. Maybe successful short-term. But sustainable? Maybe not.
That seems to be the takeaway. Great at reading people, adjusting tactics for success, but adaptability doesn't guarantee long-term success if you burn bridges built on trust.
Which leads us neatly into the actual techniques of manipulation the chapter discusses. It's a bit chilling thinking about interaction that way.
It is. The chapter defines it simply. Skillfully controlling others' actions or emotions for your own goals. And here's the kicker. Lacking empathy might actually make you better at objectively reading and using others' emotions.
Because your own feelings aren't getting in the way.
Exactly. Evolutionarily, this could have helped win resources without direct fights. Just subtly outmaneuvering people, exploiting weaknesses.
Like Dutton observed, using charisma, cool judgment.
Gain trust, then use it like a tool. No real emotional attachment. And Blair's research points out the lack of ethical breaks. It's purely about personal benefit.
It sounds incredibly calculated.
It is presented that way. Appearing cooperative while secretly working your own angle, subtly influencing power dynamics. Emotional detachment lets you plan rationally, long-term, without guilt getting in the way.
And we definitely see versions of this in the modern world. Business negotiations, office politics.
We do. Identifying weaknesses, feigning support while undermining someone. It happens. But the risks are always there. Exposure means losing trust, becoming isolated. You can't build lasting collaboration that way.
So manipulation might be central to the strategy, but it's inherently risky long-term.
Very much so. Charisma helps, but it's built on that detached assessment. It's a core part of the picture the chapter paints.
Okay, and all this ties into acquiring social status, which makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. Higher status often meant better survival and reproduction chances.
Right. The chapter outlines strategies based on that lack of empathy, coldness, self-focus, manipulation, all aimed at gaining and keeping power. A key tactic. Manipulating relationships. Calmly observing others, using charm to get support.
Using people like rungs on a ladder.
That's a fair analogy based on the description.
Hmm.
Dutton's work on charisma comes up again, projecting confidence to get leadership roles, then potentially using that power purely for self-interest, maybe taking credit for others' work or getting rid of rivals without ethical
And
qualms.
adaptability is key here too, right? Changing tactics.
Definitely. Aggressive one minute, friendly the next, depending on the situation. Reading the room, controlling their own emotions. Blair's research is relevant there too.
And the fearlessness we talked about, making bold moves as a leader.
Exactly. That helps achieve short-term wins in risky fields like business or politics. Controlling information is another tactic, sharing only what helps you. Hiding the bad stuff, maybe leaking damaging info about rivals.
It sounds like a pretty ruthless climb.
The chapter certainly implies that, but it also highlights the instability. Maintaining power this way is hard. If your ruthlessness gets exposed, trust evaporates. Genuine loyalty is difficult to inspire without empathy, and there's always the risk of legal or social backlash.
So getting power might be achievable, but holding on to it long-term without trust, much harder.
That's the tension. Manipulation and cold logic might get you there, but sustaining it is another challenge entirely.
Okay, this brings us back to fearlessness and risk-taking. It seems central to this whole picture.
It really is. The chapter looks at how diminished fear allows risk-taking without all the usual stress and anxiety. Neurologically, Dutton and Blair link this to reduced activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center.
So they literally feel less fear,
The idea is they're less affected by dangerous or stressful situations, allows for quick, bold decisions, seeing opportunity where others see only risk.
which would be a huge advantage in certain fields.
Absolutely. High-stakes business, politics, maybe stock trading, entrepreneurship, places where calculated risks can pay off big, fast. Evolutionarily, think about dangerous hunts or conflicts. A calm approach under pressure would be invaluable for getting food, defending territory.
It could benefit the group, too, in those specific high-danger situations.
Potentially, yes. And in social competition, less fear means being willing to engage in cutthroat tactics without worrying about failure or criticism. Dutton sees this as key in psychopathic leadership, decisive action in crises.
And they can use others' fear against them in manipulation.
Yes, exploiting others' anxieties for gain is mentioned. But, as always, the downside looms large.
Overlooking long-term risks.
Mhm.
Recklessness.
Exactly. Focusing only on the short-term gain can lead to impulsive decisions, risky investments that backfire, harming themselves or their organizations. And the inability to empathize with others' fears makes building trust really hard. Fearless manipulation might work for a while, but it risks total isolation.
So fearlessness helps survival and success in specific contexts, but without careful consideration of consequences, it can be destructive.
That's the core message. Calculated risks can be advantageous, but recklessness driven by a lack of fear can ultimately undermine success.
Which naturally leads to the next point, exploiting relationships. It sounds like the culmination of manipulation and detachment.
It is. It's about viewing others fundamentally as resources for personal gain. The lack of empathy allows this transactional perspective, others' needs, feelings, they're secondary to your own goals.
A very pragmatic, almost instrumental view of people.
Dutton's idea of using charm to gain trust, then exploiting it. Blair's point about emotional detachment allowing you to form or break connections based purely on utility, it's about identifying vulnerabilities, desires, and using them for control.
Like using praise strategically, then calling in favors. Or stirring up conflict to come out on top.
Those are the kinds of tactics the chapter describes. Consolidating power in a workplace, maybe taking credit for team success while blaming others for failures. Managing your image carefully, different faces for different people, loyal to the boss, maybe dismissive to those below.
That sounds exhausting, frankly. And risky.
Extremely risky. Discovery leads to backlash, lost trust, resentment, even retaliation. It forces a constant need to find new people to connect with and potentially exploit because the old relationships become toxic or unusable.
So effective as a short-term survival tactic, perhaps, but fundamentally unstable.
That's the essence of it. Treating people as resources works until you run out of resources or get found out. It requires constant movement and new connections.
Okay, the final big theme was the interplay between lacking empathy and having this cold, rational judgment. How that combination can actually be an advantage sometimes.
Right. They're often seen as opposites, empathy and cold logic. But the chapter suggests that for individuals with these traits, the lack of empathy combined with strong rationality can be a survival strategy. It allows intense focus on goals without being distracted by others' emotions.
Making decisions based purely on the facts, the logic, without the emotional static.
Exactly. It avoids the emotional burden in relationships, keeps decision-making clear in competitive situations. The chapter even touches on how a lack of remorse might remove the brakes on certain actions, making them more efficient, albeit potentially harmful.
But it also mentions extreme situations where this might be genuinely beneficial.
Yes, in truly life or death scenarios where worrying about others' feelings could actually endanger you. Emotional detachment allows prioritizing self-preservation.
A stark survival of the fittest advantage.
That's the argument. And in complex, high-stakes situations like business, that unemotional decision-making, objectively weighing risks and benefits, can be seen as a strength. Being too swayed by emotion can be a disadvantage in trading, negotiations, etc. Rationality offers control.
But surely there are huge downsides to being purely cold and rational.
Oh, definitely. The chapter stresses this. It damages relationships, hinders long-term success built on trust and collaboration. Leadership needs a balance. Too detached, you lose trust. Too empathetic, you might struggle with tough calls.
And socially, just being cold can alienate people, right?
Absolutely. You risk losing cooperation. Short-term gains might be possible, but long-term isolation is a real danger. Especially in workplaces, purely detached profit-seeking can kill loyalty and motivation. Empathy often fosters productivity.
So it's another balancing act. Lack of empathy and cold rationality offer situational advantages, but extremes are harmful. Balance is key for long-term success.
That's the essential point.
Okay, so this exploration of adaptability comes next. How individuals with these traits might adjust to changing environments, which is key to evolutionary success.
Right. Adaptability is crucial. The chapter suggests, drawing on researchers like Hare, that individuals with these traits can handle change with a certain cool-headedness precisely because they aren't tied down by norms or emotions. They can maintain that charming, manipulative facade while pursuing their goals single-mindedly, which can be an advantage when things are uncertain.
So their detachment helps them pivot quickly.
That's the idea. Evolutionary psychologists like Buss argue adaptability boosts reproductive success. Prioritizing self-interest, skillfully reading and using others' emotions without guilt, these aid survival in competitive, changing landscapes.
Are there specific cognitive traits involved?
Newman's research, mentioned in the context, points to things like reduced sensitivity to risk cues, allowing quicker adaptation without getting stressed. Cognitive flexibility, in a way, as an evolutionary plus.
But there must be limits, especially regarding trust.
Always. Building long-term trust is their recurring challenge. Robert Wright's work on cooperation and trust highlights this short-term gains from manipulation often come at the expense of the long-term benefits of cooperation.
Hare emphasizes the manipulation aspect as an evolutionary benefit in competition, though.
Yes, the ability to manipulate for self-interest is seen as providing advantages, and Buss even notes potential short-term mating success, despite the lack of deep connection, contributing to reproductive success in that specific way.
So the adaptability comes from ignoring emotions, shifting strategies quickly, being flexible.
Essentially, yes, it makes them effective in certain contexts, but limited in environments where long-term trust and cooperation are paramount. It's that delicate balance again between short-term advantage and long-term constraints.
Which brings us to the final point. Evolutionary success and their role in modern society. How do these traits fare now?
Well, the chapter revisits that core question: how can these socially deviant traits lead to evolutionary success? Hare's work suggests advantages in challenging environments through manipulation, cold-bloodedness, charm, especially when resources are scarce.
And adaptability is key, as Buss points out.
Right. Calm, calculated actions in shifting environments, quick behavioral changes without emotional baggage. And modern society, arguably, has factors that favor these traits.
Puzzle.
Highly competitive systems that value ambition, self-interest. Certain business leadership roles might reward manipulation, maximizing personal gain. Charisma helps reach high positions. Hare even notes business leaders exhibiting these traits: decisiveness, risk-taking, giving a competitive edge, unemotional decisions, strategic reactions.
But that often leads to short-term success versus long-term trust issues, right?
Exactly. Buss mentions they might leverage cooperation strategically, not empathetically, effective short-term, but risky long-term due to trust issues. And modern structures, globalization, digitization might make detection harder, as Wright suggests. They can adapt to digital environments too.
Especially in fast-paced sectors. Startups, maybe.
Potentially. Cool-headed decisions. Decisive action, charisma for funding these can be advantageous when the focus is short-term, but the limitation remains. Difficulty building trust leads to isolation. From an evolutionary view, cooperation and trust are vital for long-term survival.
So success stems from their cold, adaptable nature, offering advantages in competition. But long-term flourishing is limited by trust deficits. Short-term gains are possible, especially today.
That sums it up well. It's a complex picture of adaptation, advantage, and inherent limitations.
Wow. This deep dive into the psychopath in the shadows really does make you reconsider things, how we view personality traits. It suggests that even traits we instinctively label as negative might have had a complex evolutionary role, offering real survival advantages in certain times and places.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that human behavior is incredibly varied, and the lines between good and bad can blur when you look through the stark lens of survival.
It definitely is. And understanding this evolutionary perspective, well, it doesn't excuse harmful actions, obviously. Not at all.
Absolutely not. But it does offer a broader view, maybe a more nuanced understanding of human behavioral diversity. The complex dance between our traits, the pressures of our environment, and ultimately the survival of our species.
Gives you a lot to think about. Consider the environments, past and present, where the traits we've discussed, the detachment, the adaptability, the fearlessness, might still offer some kind of edge.
Yeah.
What that really tells us about the complexities, sometimes unsettling complexities, of human success and how we interact.